each hop. And so
I know some of those words.
yeah. So trace route would be like one of the biggest threats to modern civilization.
Also, not having enough kids, right?
Yeah, I think most people, if you just take a look at the birth rate statistics, you can tell the future's going to be out because you can see children born next year. This growth trend trending down, trending down. Basically, almost every, if you look at next year, you know how many adults there will be in 8 years, because that's how big the trend is.
Strategy?
The Earth is far from overpopulated. Far from overpopulated. So the thing that's necessary to minimize the climate change to the highest conversion is to increase the sustainable energy generation. The three elements of sustainable energy usually are sustainable energy generation, primarily through solar. Major natural disasters.
Instability or something, yeah.
Yeah, you don't want to be like, subject to massive natural disasters. Obviously, the heavy lifting on energy generation will be solar. Section of land with solar panels would power the entire United States. So like a little corner of Utah or Texas, it can power the whole country. So anyway, it's really not that hard. The solar incidence is a gigawatt per square kilometer. For most nuclear,
I'm just gonna do some calculations.
most nuclear power plants.
Yeah, that's right.
It's a kilowatt per square meter, and there's a million square meters in a square kilometer. So, it's pretty simple math. So, you get like maybe 20% efficiency on that. So, power generation of megawatt per square kilometer. If you take most nuclear power plants, there's usually a pretty clear area around a nuclear power plant because people usually want to live right next to a nuclear power plant. So, the area of most nuclear power plants that is uninhabited, if covered in solar panels, would generate more power than the nuclear power plant. And then the second element that's needed are batteries to store solar and wind, because the sun doesn't shine all the time and the wind doesn't blow all the time. So the intermittency of solar and wind requires battery storage for continuous power. So that's the second part of the second pillar of sustainable energy. And the third is sustainable transport. So that means electric cars, boats, planes, and then ironically the one thing that you can't really make electric is rockets. So I'm involved in that. But although you can over time use solar power to generate fuel by pulling CO2 out of the atmosphere, combining it with H2O, creating CH4, which is methane, and O2, oxygen. And rockets are mostly oxygen by mass. So over time you can make everything basically solar powered.
So you're working on some of those problems, but the problem of wokeness specifically, you mentioned that's like a mind virus and it's destructive. And why do you think wokeness is so destructive?
understand your opinions too, but you know, like, I mean, generally, I think we should be aiming for like a positive society, and you know, that it should be okay to, you know, be humorous, and like, you know, like we should like Lucas basically wants to make comedy illegal, which is not cool.
We've experienced that.
I mean, so Chappelle, like,
Flower bed.
I mean,
4,
Trash and Chappelle, come on, man, that's good.
5,
So, so do we want
6,
a humorless society that is simply rife with condemnation and hate, basically? Yeah. At its heart, wokeness is divisive, exclusionary, and hateful. It basically gives mean people a reason. It gives them a shield to be mean and cruel, armored in false virtue. What do you think?
I agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, we've obviously seen that from the left, you know, just ourselves. You know, the left is almost this religion now, where they're so serious, and they believe what they believe with such intensity that for us to make fun of them, you know, for them it's like you're making fun of God or salvation, you know. So they're almost the new religious right, in our view.
Yeah.
He agreed with me. Nobody take it. Well, you were pretty mean to Senator Warren, though, on Twitter recently. You slammed her, man. Please don't call the manager on me, Senator Karen.
She struck first,
Yeah.
obviously. She called me a freeloader and a grifter who didn't pay taxes, basically. And I'm literally paying the most tax that any individual in history has ever paid this year. Ever. And she doesn't pay taxes. Basically at all. And her salary is paid for by the taxpayer.
Could you use TurboTax? Would that even work?
If you could die by irony, she would be dead. Irony could kill.
What would happen if you walked into an H&R Block to file your taxes?
6,
Like, could they handle your case?
My taxes are actually rather complicated. I do not have any offshore accounts.
7,
I don't have any tax shelters. I have basically
8,
Tesla and SpaceX stock, and Tesla's publicly traded, so all the information is public, and SpaceX is, you know, a C corp that is audited, you know, has outside auditors, so it's dealing with outside investors, so it is also everything is extremely transparent. There are no elaborate sort of tax avoidance schemes or anything like that. So H&R Block could easily do my taxes. You know, I don't need H&R Block. I can do it. You know, I'm probably taking a few hours to do my taxes. It's very basic.
Did you sell that stock in Tesla because of the Twitter poll?
In part,
Had you made up your mind that you were already going to do that before the Twitter poll?
I have some Tesla options that are expiring next year. So I need to exercise those options no matter what. And I was like, okay, I'll go for and exercise those options.
1,
So that something would be part of it no matter what. But then over and above that, I sold the incremental stock to try to get up to the 10% level. So just the option exercise alone would not get to 10%. So I sold stock that took me roughly make
3,
my total Tesla share sale roughly 10%.
Is the most annoying thing in the world people asking you questions like this about your personal finances. And no one ever asks me what stock I'm selling or why I made so much money last year. I mean, I'm the third richest man on my street, which is
5,
pretty good. Pretty good.
I mean, I'm not sure it's all that productive or interesting. You know, essentially all of my
6,
net worth is just in SpaceX and Tesla stock. With these two companies that I have created and have run
7,
for now almost 20 years. Have done a lot of useful things. SpaceX access to which is more tailored to what the rest of the world provided. And has a global internet system called Starlink, and is the primary provider, the only US provider of astronaut transport to the space station.
We publish 6 to 8 satire articles a day.
Some of them are funny. I mean, pretty good.
So SpaceX, transports US and as well as non-US astronauts to the space station. That was previously the US was dependent on Russia. It was doing a good job, but charging kind of crazy money per seat. So as well, with SpaceX, the cost per astronaut.
Physically, they're pretty powerful, and they're just.
When I was a kid, I wanted to be a commando. Like, I don't really remember wanting to do anything else. When I realized that there was that role that you could play in life, that's what I wanted to do. And a lot of my friends in the SEAL teams were the same way. That's what they wanted to do. As soon as they figured out, like, oh, that exists. Oh, I can do that. And I just have to sign this piece of paper and go do this stuff, and then that's what I'll be. Where does that come from?
Well, I mean, that's a very good question. I mean, I would say it's temperamental. You know, people differ tremendously in their temperaments, and to think that there's a warrior temperament is a perfectly reasonable thing to think. I mean, there's been whole cultures, many cultures, who are devoted to fostering that warrior mentality. You know, where if you weren't like that, you were the outlier. I would say that's probably true of most human cultures across most of time. You know, we've been fortunate enough to live in relatively peaceful times, at least the vast majority of us. So the necessity for that, like right at the edges of actual warfare, is much less than it might be under other historical circumstances. But it's a deep part of many people's nature. And so the question is, what do you do with that? I mean, one alternative potentially is criminal behavior. You know, the fact that so many people like watching movies about bad guys, you know, is an indication of how attractive that is to people. I think the reason for that is that Nietzsche observed at one point that most of what people regard as morality is just cowardice. And what he meant by that was that people don't do bad things not because they're good, but because they're afraid to do the bad things. And then when they see people do the bad things, they're actually really deeply attracted by that, because it speaks to part of them that could go beyond the rules. And that's actually a necessary part. It's a really necessary part. Like, you don't make men safe by making them weak. In fact, they're much more dangerous when they're weak, because they'll stab you in the back when they get the chance, or take advantage of you when they get the chance. You make men safe, let's say, by making them strong, and then by making sure that they're disciplined. And so, you know, you've got people like you have got this, let's say, warrior mentality that's a deep part of their temperament, and then you have some choices about what you might do with that. You might try to discipline it and bring it under voluntary control and integrate it into your character, in which then it can make you someone who's stalwart and indomitable and who will move forward, you know, in the face of tremendous risk. And well, that's the optimal. That's the optimal pathway if you had that kind of temperament. And I think, like, it's the men that have the most. What do you call it? It's not aggressive exactly, but we'll leave it at that. Aggressive and fearless temperaments that can be the best men, but it's like having a very powerful dog. You better discipline, because otherwise it's going to be a monster.
Well, I was a rebellious kid, right? And I could have easily gone down the path of crime. And as a matter of fact, many of my friends that I left when they stayed at home, they did that as rebels. And having big trouble with the law, or going down even paths of drugs and everything else that you could get into. When we were kids or younger, everyone kind of had the same thing. But like you said, I got so lucky, because I just signed that piece of paper, and I saw that I could do something, and I could take all that aggression and all that energy, and I could do something that was good and positive. And And we joke about that in the SEAL teams, that many guys, you actually, to be a good SEAL, you sort of have this criminal mindset that you've somehow harnessed and keep under control most of the time.
Yeah.
And occasionally it does get out of hand, and we got guys that get in trouble, and that happens. And if we only took guys that would never get in trouble, we wouldn't have anyone in the ranks, really.
Yeah, well, you also see too in the classic hero stories. I mean, you see this with Harry Potter, for example, which I'm making reference to because it was such a phenomenon. I mean, when something makes a welfare mother richer than the Queen of England, you shouldn't take note, right? And when kids are reading 500-page books and standing in line waiting for the next one, and when you produce a whole movie empire around something, you should take note of that. Well, Harry Potter's little team aren't the delinquents, right, who have no discipline, but they're also not the good kids. They're the kids who will break rules when necessary, and that's the issue. Break rules when necessary. Now the question is, when is that necessary? Well, that's sort of the ultimate ethical choice. But you know, why did that work for you? Do you think? You know, like, why was it? Well, two questions. One would be, why did you decide to step into a disciplined structure? I mean, that's obviously very difficult. And why do you think you did that, and some of the other kids that you knew that were like you didn't?
It was really one of the most rebellious things that I could do, was to join the military. So I come from a small New England town. People get done with high school, they go to college, they get a job as whatever people get jobs as. They follow that very normal path. And I didn't even know anyone who joined the military. And so that was the most rebellious thing I could do. College, no. Education, no. I'm going to go be a commando. That's what I'm going to do. And it was the most rebellious thing I could do. I think that's one of the reasons why I did it. It was also a complete breakaway from, you know, family. Oh, okay, I have no reliance on you. You know, I'm going. You don't have to worry about me anymore. I'm done. I will not rely on anyone else. I will be self-reliant, which I want to do. And so I think those are the main things that got me there. And then what's great about it for me was when I got there, you have a completely blank slate, and you have very clear directions of what you need to do to ascend the dominance hierarchy. You do this, you follow these rules, you literally fold your underwear in this way when you're going through boot camp, and you get a better grade on your military performance. So they give you very clear rules that you're supposed to follow, and very clear tasks that you have to do. And it was great for me because it was a blank slate, because when I was in high school, I was a screw up. Not bad, but not good. And so I hadn't really set myself up properly. And all of a sudden, all I had to do, that was all gone. It didn't matter. The past did not matter at all. I had a completely blank slate. If you do this stuff properly, you'll do well, and you'll ascend that.
Yeah, well, that's a very interesting thing, because then it's not merely a matter of following a set of arbitrary rules. It's following a set of rules that have a clear path to success. Right? That's a very different thing, and that's also something that's honest, because the rules of the game are well established, and then if you play it properly, you get to win. And that's a big deal as well. You know, you mentioned the SEAL types, and I've met a number of people like that. You know, they're capable of breaking rules, let's say, or maybe even inclined to break them. But I also think that this is part of the reason that I'm an admirer of Carl Jung, because Jung makes it very clear that, see, he was very interested in the barriers to enlightenment. Because if there's such a thing as being enlightened, let's say, then why isn't everyone enlightened? If it's just a matter of taking the glorious route and following your bliss, let's say, it's like, well, that sounds pretty easy. Why isn't everyone enlightened? But Jung's thinking isn't like that at all. You know, he believed that in order to transform your personality, that first of all you had to be disciplined, that's for sure, but you also had to integrate that part of you that was terrible and capable of breaking rules and make it part of you. And so then, and I really like that idea. Well, here's an example. So about 20 years ago, I would say, there was a newspaper headline in one of Canada's major newspapers, and it was the Minister of Foreign Affairs at that time, Lloyd Axworthy, and he was talking about what had happened with Milosevic in the former Soviet Union in Yugoslavia. and the atrocities that were being committed. And he said that he was caught unawares by that because he didn't have the imagination for that kind of evil. And I thought, well, you know, you think that what you're doing is signaling your virtue by making a statement like that, but from my perspective, all you're doing is stating your cowardice and your historical ignorance, because if you're going to be Minister of Foreign Affairs, you bloody well better have imagination for that kind of evil, because if you don't, then anyone who does wins. They beat you. And so you know, and again, in the Harry Potter stories, you see he's touched by evil, right? He actually has a soul fragment that's embedded within him that's as black as anything can possibly be. That's why he could talk to snakes. But without that, he wouldn't be able to have any victory. And that's exactly right psychologically. Unless you can think the way that an evil person thinks, then you're defenseless against them, because they'll go places you can't imagine, and then they win. And so the best men I've met, and it was interesting even when I was in junior high and high school, because most of my friends dropped out, you know, by the time they were grade 10, thereabouts. And a lot of them were guys who developed physically, they were pretty powerful, and they were just damn sick of putting up their hand to go to the bathroom. It's like, you know, they're not doing that anymore. One of my friends got kicked out and sort of challenged the gym teacher, you know, physically. And the gym teacher, he could do an iron cross. He was a tough guy, and so it was no trivial matter for my friend to stand up to him, but he got expelled anyways. But, you know, I noticed that it wasn't... It was often the kids whose character I admired that either quit or got expelled, and they were the tougher guys who were just sick and tired of following rules that didn't take into account their character. And then they go off and do wild raids or whatever. And you could do that in Alberta at that time. That was really hard work, you know. So it wasn't like they were necessarily taking the easy path. But like, a harmless man is not a good man. A good man is a very, very dangerous man who has that under voluntary control. And you know, you also see that one of the central female stories, let's say, if the hero archetype is the central male story, there are variants of hero archetypes that are relevant to women, and one of them is Beauty and the Beast. And you know, Beauty isn't interested in the guy who isn't the Beast. She's interested in the guy who's the Beast. And that's exactly right, but she's interested in the guy who's the beast that can be civilized and disciplined, right, and who can use that in the service, well, let's say, of a family. And that's exactly, well, that's exactly how it should be.
So I gave a speech, one of my very good friends got married a few years ago, and I gave a speech. And at this speech, he was a friend of mine, SEAL, and at this speech, I was talking about what it was to be a man, and when I felt like I was a man. And I said there was three things that I felt. One. Let me transition from being, you know, mentally insecure about who I was as a person to being, okay, I'm actually good with who I am. Number one is learning how to fight. And you know, I got into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and mixed martial arts, and I learned how to fight. And now, all of a sudden, when I looked at other people, I wasn't posturing, I wasn't trying to pretend that I was tough. I knew that most people that I would encounter, I could defeat in a physical altercation. That was number one. Number two is going into combat. Because even though you might be tough in a street fight, a fist fight with someone, when you're facing death, well, that's a whole nother level. And for me going into combat, well, what was I going to act like? Was I going to be scared? Was I going to be a coward? Was I going to be scared of death? And when I went into combat, I wasn't. I was fine. I was okay with the fact that I could die, and I was okay with that. And I made good decisions and did what I was supposed to do. And the last one was got married and had kids. Because all of a sudden, all these things, these being aggressive and working to fight and be able to destroy in an efficient way, well, then I took that and combined it with, okay, I'm going to take care of my wife and our children, and that's what I'm going to do. And my point in giving this speech was he was a guy that had learned how to fight. He was a guy that had been in combat, and now there was one more step to take, which was, okay, now you're going to get married, you're going to take care of these people. So it's interesting that, once again, that dichotomy that you talk about, it fits perfectly into the way I figured things out as a guy that went to high school and joined the military. It's kind of It's kind
Yeah,
of
well,
crazy,
you
but
act-
it reinforces what you always say, which is that there's deeper meaning. There's a reason why I'm thinking that, and the reason is because of the things that you talk about, and the way these things are overlaid throughout history for human beings to have gotten to this point.
Yeah, well, you acted it out, you know, which is what you're supposed to do, and it's better to act it out and to understand it, you know, so that's best. It's better to understand it and not act it out than to not understand it at all. But the best is to act it out and understand it, and because then you can, you know, then the way that you represent the world and yourself is in accordance with the way that you act, and that's optimized.
Yeah, it's something that I was kind of acting out again. No real guide. Like my guidelines were like I was raised in the SEAL teams. That was sort of my guidelines. And here's a good example. When I first got in the SEAL teams, there was no war going on. So what did a good SEAL do? You know what you did? You went out, drank, and got in bar fights. That's what a good SEAL did. So you know what I did? Went out, drank, got in bar fights. That's what I'm supposed to do. It took me a while to figure out, no, there's actually something more than that. Like, we're actually supposed to be preparing for war. And so now, like you said, I definitely acted things out and sort of was on a decent path, but as I got older and more mature, and to this day, as I can look around and actually overlay the understanding on the way I've carried out my life, it's very helpful to me, and it also helps me explain it to other people that see the path I'm on and go, they like that path. They would like to join me on that path. And I get guys that, you know, when I was in, I look like a serial killer for all practical purposes. That's the way I come across, right?
Not creepy enough.
There's guys that would, you know, guys that would work for me or guys that would be around me, and they'd see me and they'd kind of latch on to the fact that I was tough and aggressive. And some of those guys, they wouldn't catch the other part, which was that I was really savvy and I was working and I was maneuvering and I was, you know, figuring things out and talking to my boss in such a way that we could get where we needed to be. I was doing that whole other side. And so I get these guys that would end up not doing as well as they should do because they were just, hey, Jocko's just ultra aggressive and he gets after it, and so that's what I'm going to do, and I'll be in the same place. The guys that would do well are the guys that said, oh yeah, Jocko's awesome and he's aggressive and he gets after it, but he's also working and he's also maneuvering, he's also massaging the egos of the people around him to make sure that they get positioned in the right spot where they can go to war in the right way. And so, as I've gotten older, I've been able to tell people that more clearly. Like, hey, it's not just about that side of the ultra aggressive. You gotta be aggressive. You gotta be willing to fight. You gotta be willing to kill. You gotta be willing to die. At the same time, you gotta be able to temper all those things in such a way that they can be controlled and disciplined.
Well, I also think that that's part of what makes a world peaceful in the final analysis, because if you're around people who are dangerous but disciplined, then everyone watches their step, and that's exactly what should happen. Everybody should watch their step, and if there's no reason for that, then well, there's no sanction for poor behavior, for example.
Okay, so this is OSINT. Welcome. Thank you for being here on the first day. Thank you. So we're going to talk. I should probably turn this on. So we're going to talk a little bit first about what identity is. Identity is not just our names and our address and things like that. Things that an identity could be our credit card numbers. It's also who we are. It's our fingerprints. It's the things that we like. It's the things that we do. It's qualities, preferences, all kinds of different things. So identity is not just something that someone can steal. It's also something that makes us unique that we can change. So int is a military term for intelligence. There are multiple different kinds of ints. There is human and signals intelligence, things like that. OSINT is a particular type of intelligence gathering that uses data that's collected passively on the internet or from other sources. So open means that we're not like doing clandestine things. We're not doing like CIA operations where we're trying to get information. That's a totally different kind of intelligence. So we're just looking at publicly available sources and we're gathering data from that. It's intended to be secret to be valuable. Because the things that we share on the internet every day on social media and other things, it can be a danger to ourselves, our companies, our friends, our families. So who uses OSINT? Basically everybody. You do, everybody does. If you've ever been on a date, if you've ever applied for a job, if you've, even neighbors, all kinds of different things. Advertisers use it a lot. That's something we see with Facebook and things like that. But everybody uses it at some point. And once you start to see what we're doing, you will understand that. So the parts of an SE attack are just like any other attack. It starts with reconnaissance. We're gathering information. We're just trying to figure out what we can figure out. And then we move into more active parts of the attack phase. So we're actually seeing it. We're actually connecting with things. We're gaining access, elevating privilege, command and control from there. But we're going to focus on the first stage, which is just gathering information about humans, human targets. So OPSEC is operational security, and it's a defense against intelligence. So if you practice OPSEC, then you are aware of the possibility for intelligence to be gathered about you, and you take active measures to prevent that data from being collected. So if I am going to a town or something, I may not say when I'm leaving, how long I'm going to be gone. If I post a picture, I may look to make sure things in the background aren't giving anything away about where I am. This is OPSEC, and we'll talk about this later. We can also do things to mislead people with OPSEC. So we can say, yeah, I'm going to be in town all week, I'm going to this, but you're really out of town. So you're using adversarial information to mislead in order to protect your self and identity. So when we perform an SE attack, recon helps us in a lot of ways. We want to gather as much information as possible, and we don't always know what we're going to find. So you start out and you have kind of a basic idea of what you're going to do, of who you're attacking. You might know a company name, you might know a website, you might know, let's say you want to install ransomware or something, you might want to go after people in a certain income level, so you're looking for certain targets. So you want to try to figure out common threads, and then follow them down the rabbit hole. And we've analyzed what we found and built a profile that becomes more helpful. So I love the CIA. They talk about other offline and things that we wouldn't necessarily think about for intelligence. School newspapers are a really good one. Journals, photos, everybody's looked at Google Maps, Street View to try to figure out if there's parking or something. That's image intelligence. What information is valuable? Basically anything you can think of. In addition to the things that make us unique. Anything that could potentially be a vector for attack is valuable. So if you can find out, are they using Excel versus Google Sheets? pastures. We're going out against horrible things that are happening in the world. So we will do not all sources are going to give you credible information. So we have to be really careful about what we find. When we find something, we need to consider the source. We need to consider, is it trustworthy? Is it a news outlet? Or is it something wrong? Not just the CEO, not just the call center people, but the admins. Executive admins are huge targets. They have tons of access. They know everything about the CEO. They're used to talking to people. They're used to setting up appointments. And they work fast. They're quick on their feet, and they have just tons of power. Also, new employees are statistically going to be most frequently targeted because they're really eager for everybody to appreciate them, and they want to show that they're good employees, and that they may do things without asking, and they may not have been trained in how things actually work, so going out the process may be less suspicious to them.
8.
So, when we talk about OSINT versus espionage, we're talking about
10.
publicly available data. When you friend someone,
1.
that is not public anymore. Then you have a potentially private data that's being shared because of a friendship relationship. It's also illegal in
4.
cases and does violate the terms of service of various social networking
6.
sites, as well as copyright and privacy violations.
7.
All things you need to be careful about if you're on a job.
8.
These are probably something that is covered in your contract, covered by your statement of work. Just things that you might want to think about. Not all sources of open source intelligence are free. A lot of those people search sites that you may have seen, you have to pay in order to get access to their databases. If you can pay for them, it can increase your intelligence exponentially. So I would include that in any kind of budget that you have for a job if you're doing this. And even, they're not that expensive even if you just want to have it for investigating dating partners or whatever it is that you're doing. It's still useful to have some of these tools. So on social media, we are proactively sharing personal data about ourselves.
1.
We are doing the opposite of being private.
2.
So anytime we like a post, anytime we
3.
comment on something, any of the groups that we belong to, that's all public. Unless they're specifically marked private, all of that information is public, especially your profile picture. Your profile picture is always public, and anybody that likes your profile picture, you can see who liked it. You can click right on the links. So the kind of data that you can gather is not just name and phone. It's things like marital status, political affiliation, and we saw this with the Cambridge Analytica issue that happened earlier this year, where